Boom. Okay, we got it finally. Here we go. I'm sitting here with the awesome Joey Utah. This is episode 15 of the Veteran Growth Podcast. So excited for what we're about to bring you guys. It's Super Bowl Sunday, and we're doing a collaboration. We're recording back-to-back episodes. Joey, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for what you're about to bring to this show.
Absolutely, man. I'm all about inspiring others and helping veterans, so I'm here to help, buddy.
I want to read this off your website, just dive right into it. Everybody gets an introduction before you actually come on, so they already know a little bit about you. Your story and my story, as we already know, they kind of align just with the things that we both got ourselves into, sort of getting out of the military. We both kind of hit a pitfall, but we both seem to have found ways to cope, and now we're both sort of spreading that knowledge as much as we can, turning that mirror on ourselves. But I want to read this really fast and then let you give us an explanation on why you're doing what you're doing, man. It says, my mission is to show you how self-communication and honest expression can greatly improve the quality of your life. All you have to do is make a choice and accept where you stand in your life right now. There's no secret sauce. It's all about open and objective communication. This is how you find purpose in life and figure out what really you. Once you're able to communicate effectively with yourself, you will also be able to better communicate with others, which will only lead to more meaningful and lasting relationships in your personal and professional life. Real change starts from within by taking action, and if you do so, you will achieve your wildest dreams. I love that. It's everything to me in a sense. So can you touch on, like, why is communication so important? Where did this all come from? Just give us.
Yeah, so communication's always been a big thing for me, man. And I start from the ground up, meaning I talk about how important it is we communicate well with others when it comes to interpersonal communication, to listening better to one another, to using good manners. But where I really first started to understand how important communication was actually when I was in the military. I was assigned to become security forces in the Air Force, which, as you know, is military police. And during my 4 years in the Air Force, I really started to learn how if I communicate well, yes, with myself, but obviously with others as well, people are just more likely to do things for me. They're more likely to comply in my police work. They're, in using communication with my friends and my family, I've learned that communication can help build more rapport and more trust in relationships. And where I really, because what happened was I got out of the military in 2014, as you know, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And in all of my frustration and my deep depression and all that stuff, I started sabotaging a lot of my relationships. I was an unhappy, disgruntled veteran, and I started blaming everybody. I started blaming my parents, blaming my family, the VA, the military, just anybody I could. So that's where I first started to understand that, okay, you need to learn how to communicate with yourself and stop blaming everybody else. And then where I really started to take a turn and see the real benefits of communicating with others was when I started rebuilding my relationships with those who I had wronged previously. I won't go into the whole story, but I had problems with some of my siblings, some of my close friends, and
What did that allow you to do? Just with resolve and being able to move on, I guess, and not let those past experiences and things like draw you back and allow them to be excuses. Like, how was that effective to go back and mend a lot of those issues?
100%, man. There's an old expression I like to live by that is, when you're able to apologize to others, and also when you're able to forgive others, you're really apologizing and forgiving yourself. There's no like I said, there's no secret sauce to it. So what I learned is, once I was able to kind of backtrack and go back and correct my relationships and make peace with them, the ones that I was physically able to, I just immediately saw such great benefits in my own life, and I felt, not to mention, I felt awesome about myself. Here I was I'm a very proud kid. I was raised in a large Italian family. So talking about feelings and the stuff that I talk about and being vulnerable, it did not come easy to me, so
Nah,
I don't expect it to come easy to anybody.
right.
But
I understand that a lot, and one thing I would like to point out too about that is it doesn't mean you are out wronging people your whole life, and this is like you have to go back and say sorry to everyone before you're allowed to become successful. It's just literally like a lot of people don't realize it, but some of the things that hold us down the most are the closest to us.
yes.
Right. And so it's funny that of all the things that you and I talked about over the past week, forming this collaboration and just getting to know one another, that's one thing that we didn't really hit on was just the fact that we both also did that, because I did a lot of the same thing. And I went through a really tough time with personal relationships, and it's all relative to turning the mirror on yourself, I think. Would you agree? I mean, just being able to shed that light on your own, like just exposing everything, I think.
100%.
Anything that
100%.
slows you down. So
Yeah.
tell us, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, so tell us about what you're doing to get that message out there more. You're basically taking things on your own, right? Like you're working part-time sort of to maintain bills and stuff, but like you are on the full entrepreneurial path. Like you don't have a career that's really bringing home any bacon. And so tell us what you're doing with that so we can get some more awareness of where you're going to be, what you're going to be doing, how we can help support you too, with your public speaking.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So it's all accidental how I got into this whole entrepreneur public speaking thing that is now my bread and butter. What happened was when I was going through my deepest depression as a veteran, I just started posting about it on social media. I just started putting out my business out there, something that, again, I had no experience doing. I started talking about how I was depressed, how I was frustrated, all this stuff. And then I started talking about how I was dealing with it, how I was writing out daily goals to get me to where I had to be. I started following a lot of good people on social media. I started, Tony Robbins is one of my favorite people, one of the most inspiring people for me because he kind of got me started with this whole communication thing. But
He's one of the most successful in my opinion.
He's the best in my opinion, but that's a whole nother podcast we could do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just started putting my message out there, and what happened was it was totally organic. I just started getting strangers and veterans and all different kinds of people who related with my story, just started reaching out to me. And, a few people suggested that I become a motivational speaker. I hate that word personally, because as I told you last time, I'm not a motivational guy. I'm just very honest with myself, and I understand what kind of people and what kind of situations I don't like. And I'm very realistic, and I avoid those, or I try to work through them, I'm not saying run away.
I also think, though, too, the journey you're taking on, I think you might just also be a little humble, too. I think you are a very motivating person because of those qualities, because they come far and few. I mean, so what you got to look at is you are motivating other individuals to be that way. You are motivating that Italian teenager to accept his emotions and to acknowledge him. So, I mean, I think that maybe not motivational speaker. I think motivational is a tricky word because, like, for me, I don't correlate motivation to success. Like, I think motivation is what gets you started at looking at a Tony Robbins YouTube video. But if you're actually going to apply what he says on that video, that's more than motivation, because that's the gut check moment where you're sitting in your apartment, depressed as shit, like, fuck, I got to do this. I have to learn how to change. I can't keep going. So that's like motivation, like I said, is tricky in my opinion. It's crucial. And so, yeah, maybe we'll find a new term for you. Maybe we'll just create a new market of like going around and speaking like truth talk, something,
Truth talk. That's got a nice ring to it. Actually, somebody suggested this a few weeks ago. Joe, you're a resiliency advisor. I don't know. To anybody listening, to anybody who's listening to this, let me know what you think about that. I thought it was a little edgy.
Resiliency advisor. Maybe, yeah. I think you're onto something either way. So what is the goal there, I mean, how does that tie into the company? Give us more about where your mission is going to be going over the next, the span of like the next 10 years and stuff. What do you want to accomplish? Things like that.
Sure. So where, in terms of where I see myself going as a company, I know it's cheesy, but I literally want to create as much content and as much positivity in the air as possible. So when some people talk about starting a business, they talk about their mission statement and their 5-year plan. What my 5-year plan, I guess, would entail is I want to create a culture. That's what my mission is. I want to create a culture where we empower one another, not just military veterans, not just civilians, but both, everybody. We're all human beings. And like I preface in my self-help book, which I'm going to shamelessly plug right now, but as I preface it,
we're going to get to that anyway.
Pain comes in all different shapes and sizes, guys. We all go through it, whether you're jealous, whether you're frustrated with where your life's at, you're unhappy with your relationships, we all go through it. So why don't we lean on each other? Why don't we help each other out and come together with this stuff? So in terms of where I'm looking at bringing this stuff, I've got a podcast that I recently released, which we're going to record on next. I've got a lot of YouTube content I'm ready to release, a lot of blogs. There's a ton of stuff. I won't go into too much detail, but like I said, I'm in it to create a culture, man. I want to empower us because this isn't just a military. As everybody knows, military veterans, there's a high suicide rate. But I look at the country as a whole and where we're at, and I know you're not, we don't get political when we talk, but just where we're at as a country.
Reasons, though, for sure.
Yeah, we're just so divided right now, and I feel like if we had more common ground, and if we understood one another and listened to each other when we were having different struggles in life, we could help each other more. We come together and beat this shit together.
Mm-hmm. I just posted, I know, right after I said, I'm not super political on the show. I just posted on Instagram, like, some of y'all are too busy being Democrat and Republican to forget that you stopped becoming decent a long time ago. It's just like the idea is like you're right. Like, let's create a new culture. And a lot of the people you'll hear, yes, you see a lot of politics on social media, but personally, when I actually hear what people truly want, they're sick of it. It's like everybody just wants that sort of peace again. And one thing that excites me, and I know it has to do with just the time we're in, being one of the most incredible, it just is, as far as like everything is concerned, technology, science, like where we are as humankind. I think like we're just so advanced, and it's just a blessing to be in this space, but I think that I have seen sort of like a shift in this culture that I think a lot of us are visualizing. It might not always be the same exact criteria, but I see a lot of people like you and I who are starting to step up and just say, you know what, like it's time to find a way to make this different than what it's been, or make it better than what it is, and just reach out and grab people. And content is the way to do that, right? And so it's cool to see that that's a big mission of yours. It's going to be very important over time. So let's stay on the topic of content. Let's move to audio. I think audio is one of the biggest things for veterans because like you and I can be right there with somebody in their car. We can be right there with somebody in that hotel room. You never know like where our voices could end up. And that's one of the things that really rocks home for me for this show. But tell us more about the Joey Utah. I know a lot of our visions align with our podcasts as well. So it's beautiful. So just like we know you're a podcast host, but tell us about that journey. I know you're new, and I consider myself to be new as well. But I mean, so tell me how that's gone, just getting involved with like the podcast space and how are you liking it?
I love it, dude. I love it. No, but I do want to say something to you too. We are trailblazers, and there's no humility when I say that. We are trailblazers in that there aren't a lot of veterans. Let me rephrase that. There are a lot of veterans who are trying to do things for the veteran community, trying to be more proactive, and that's great. I give all the credit to them. But the ones who are reaching the most voices, like yourself, the Veteran Growth Podcast, a couple other guys who I follow, this is what needs to happen more, especially in the veteran community. And like I said, a lot of people, you asked me why I started the podcast. man, I went through some shit. I went through some tough times when I got out, and when I pulled myself up, I picked my pants up and stepped out of the abyss. I realized I got to take care of my boys and girls, my brothers and sisters who are suffering around the world and around the country. So I do feel that we have a huge responsibility to take care of one another in that regard. As far as the podcast goes, you know what? When I was going through my darkest days, I listened to a lot of Joe Rogan podcasts. That got me through a lot of hard days. And that's where I first started understanding that there is a power, like you just said, there's a power in the audio, if somebody's not even in the same room as you, maybe they just have you on their phone or in their car on their ride home from work. You could just, if somebody's listening to the right kind of content, you have the potential to change their lives without even knowing the person. And for me,
yeah,
I mean, that was just, once I understood that and how much potential there was, I jumped right in. And it's ironic because how I got my start, if you go back and listen to episode 1 with a fellow veteran of mine, Sergeant Adrian Castillo, who I served with in the Air Force, that guy kind of got me started. He kind of was one of the first people who was hearing my message and was calling me up constantly. Joe, you got to start this podcast. You got to start this podcast. So I think, like I said, I know it all ties in together, but we gotta pump each other up. We got to motivate one another to do great things.
Yeah. I love that. Just you've had a lot of the same sort of epiphanies as me. For anyone that knows any of my followers that know my journey, my big thing was watching Daily V from Gary Vaynerchuk. Got really big into Gary V, but I was listening to podcasts just as much. I actually didn't listen to much of his podcast. I was listening to other ones. And, Tony Robbins has a really good podcast. There's so many podcasts out there. I mean, like Andy Frisella is one that I still listen to this day. When I catch myself just making too many excuses on a Tuesday or something, just one of those days of the week where I'm just in a mood, it's like instead of, it doesn't matter what I could be doing, I'll just make sure I listen to Andy Frisella at some point, like whether I just go to get in the car for a minute, I had to go somewhere. It's like I just catch something that he's saying, and it turns you right around. It goes back to applying the knowledge that you receive too. A lot of people don't believe that by listening to podcasts, like people, if you could just get over that 5-minute hump of taking that decision to turn on a podcast versus a song or something, just watch what that decision alone could do for you. Just your mindset that you'll have after listening to the show. So I'm glad that you kind of have the same logic. That's why audio is becoming so powerful, is people are really realizing, and a lot of people are getting good at putting the messages out there that need to be put out there too, I think. So it all just takes, like you said, it takes this community, it takes this network, and it takes that consistent effort, that like persistent path of progress or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you started the podcast, and you also have this book, and it's a self-help book. And so a lot of these things that, like I said, that you're doing, that's all stuff that I kind of see myself doing as well. Just writing, like I want to have a book, or if not more than one book out there in the world eventually. I want to go and speak. Like it doesn't matter where. I would love to just be able to personally interact like that. Could you touch on communication and speaking and things for people that are listening who might, I don't know, who might want to do something like that, or maybe they are like in charge of a club or something with their kids' school, or just anybody that needs more on presenting to groups. Like, do you have anything that you could provide through your company? Or, I mean, you do like small business or home business coaching or something like that too, right? So where can people go, and what kind of services could they get in touch with you for and stuff like that?
Sure. So anybody listening is more than welcome to go to joeyutah.com, and that's common spelling. So I do a number of things, as you were just saying. I do public speaking a lot, which I'll just go ahead and explain it. I base my workshops, my public speaking workshops, which I started doing in late 2018. I base them off the principles of my book. And again, I'm not trying to shamelessly plug, but there's a lot of good value in my book. in that if you want to
talk about it.
Yeah. So what I do is I teach a 4-step system. And
Okay.
I believe that if you apply this 4-step system to any part of your life, any aspect of your life that's causing you some kind of pain, you can fix it if you really apply the techniques I talk about. And I didn't make this stuff up. This is just my weird way of doing things. But the first step is to identify what's bothering you. There's whether you're in AA or NA or whatever kind of self-help program, you got to find what the problem is. You got to be honest with yourself. So step one is
like
to
the real problem too. Yeah, not some bullshit excuse you're making for yourself, blaming it on somebody else. It has to be a real gut check. Like, what the fuck is wrong with me?
Yes.
And find it once you really stick hard to those rules. But go ahead. Continue. Sorry.
No, it's okay. And that's the main part. And that's the hardest part. Us as humans, especially males, we have a hard time getting in touch with our feelings. So what I do in step one is, yes, identify what's bothering you, but even more so to tie in what you just said, the feeling, identify the primary feeling that's causing you, whether it's jealousy, frustration, maybe you feel like you're being ignored, something that always bothers me. I hate when people aren't listening. I hate when I'm talking to someone and they pull out their cell phone mid-conversation. But once I identified these things that bother me, as Kyle lifts up his phone.
Right. Yeah. I have your website up, I promise.
That was your warning. Right. But step one's always the hardest, right? Whenever you have to sit back and humble yourself and look in the mirror and say, gee, Joe, what is it about me that I don't like right now? What is the feeling that I'm not comfortable with right now? That's the hardest for anybody. Once you do that, step two is all about taking responsibility, whether that includes having to apologize to somebody else or having to apologize and forgive yourself, whatever it is. Step three, now that you've figured out the problem and you've taken responsibility, you're going to come up with a winning game plan, right? So for anybody who's listening, who is thinking to themselves, man, I want to start my own business. I want to start my own podcast. Well, here you go. I just gave you the first 3 steps right there. Right? Figure out what the problem is, where you're experiencing pain or frustration, take responsibility for it. And now step 3, come up with a winning game plan. Maybe you do have to hire somebody to help you get started. Maybe you do need to go listen to Kyle's podcast, the Veteran Growth Podcast, and get some really good insight. Whatever it is, come up with a clear path to getting it. And then step 4, and besides step 1, step 4 is probably the hardest, is start making moves. I cannot tell you how many kids I coach who love to come up with a plan. They love to prepare, but when it's time to execute, they can't get that first few steps going, and I get it. I've been there too, where I'm ready to go. I'm ready to work out. And then I just can't, I just can't start the car or walk out the door, whatever it is. Right. Mm-hmm. So this is where it's very important to always remember your why. Why did you get started to begin with? Why did you start this podcast? Why did you decide to go lose 50 pounds? Was it to feel better? Was it to have more energy to hang out with your friends or your kids or your family? Whatever it is. And a lot of people who know me and follow me on social media know that my big why right now is, like I said, the military veterans. There's 22 a day committing suicide. I wake up every day. I have bad days just like everybody else. But the thing that keeps me going is the why, man. Because when I'm laying in bed, sitting there and all my thoughts and shit's not moving, I just think, man, how many people could I be helping if I was creating content right now or writing a blog or making a video, whatever it is,
You're right. It's how, that's basically why I'm doing all of this as well. It was, I had an original podcast. There was no sort of niche. I knew I wanted to help people. And then it kind of goes back to earlier how you said that our mission is never done as veterans. And that stuck with me because I've been saying that a lot. If you don't think you have a purpose, it's bullshit. You need to redirect your purpose into helping other veterans. That is the mission. We are still a team. I'm glad to hear that your why is based similarly to mine because we're gonna have so much that we can just develop together and keep pushing just out for more and more people to hear. So it's very exciting. It's very humbling to know that, I'm not alone in what I'm trying to do. And it's a lot of people would think isn't that competition and stuff, but it's those are usually the people who just don't understand the name of the game. Those are people who usually are looking for like get rich quick schemes on business.
Yep.
Like just
Yep.
they don't have the right outlook on everything yet. They don't get it enough, I
Yep.
think. And the idea is like you want to have a strong. It's hard to get anywhere without a team, basically. So love what you're doing. I can't wait to basically just keep like changing people, and just reaching out and helping
Yep.
lives as we go along. So, what big plans, I would say, do you have coming up for like your podcast? Like, you're just planning on launching? Do you have like a set schedule for your show, anything like that? Or, I mean, is there a way that people who might be interested could come on the show? Give
Sure.
us a little more on your show. And then for those that don't know who are listening to, Joey and I, we're collaborating. So like we're doing back-to-back episodes. And so you guys will actually be able to find me on his show as well. But give us a little more info on your show, just in case people don't
Yeah,
jump
sure.
up there right away.
So our so our shows are very similar. The only difference I might say is maybe our audiences, because yours is great, but it's called the Veteran Growth Podcast. So I know your immediate help is targeted at the veterans. I think that's friggin' awesome, man. Mine was initially that. It's called the Joey Utah Perspective, and what I do is I bring on different guests to give their insight or tell their story or give some kind of inspiration, like I'm going to have you do in a little bit, Kyle, to other people who are listening or struggling. So whether you're a veteran, that's obviously one of my big parts of my audience. But I also, as an entrepreneur, I feel like I have a responsibility to help young entrepreneurs, young college kids, young people, even older. I keep saying the word young, but anybody who wants to do something more with their life, that's who I am targeting, right? Anybody who has ever had a good idea and been like, man, I wish I could do that, but I don't know. I want to be that guy who you listen to and you're like, you know what? Screw it. I'm doing it. This kid did it. Because something I love telling people is, guys, besides the Air Force, there's nothing really special about me. I don't have any college degrees. I don't have any particular certification. I'm just a guy who got honest with himself and figured out what makes me happy in life. And even more importantly, like you said before, what gave me purpose in life, And that's who my podcast
No, I completely agree. That's exciting stuff. Like taking action is critical. It's literally, some people refer to it as working, hustling, grinding.
Mm-hmm.
Like taking action. I'm reading a lot of real estate books right now. Everybody, and I'm talking